fascinating topic. I've never made a video on it before, and I can't think of another YouTuber that has either. Talk about dynamic range compression. I made the mistake, and I was out shooting about half the day today, and also too some of yesterday. I was feeling better and recovering from taking 2 energy drinks that nearly killed me, and that is on dynamic range compression. And people love to talk about, well, what's the dynamic range of that wonderful camera? You know, it doesn't really matter because it does. It doesn't matter for studio settings. It doesn't matter if you actually have control over your lighting. And something that nobody ever talks about in any of these YouTube videos is lighting ratios. What are the ratios between your highlights and your shadows? This is a reason why, one of the countless reasons why, having a light meter is a good light meter. Most light meters actually can't tell you your lighting ratios, like a Sekonic 858 will, and the one prior to that will. But you have to have an expensive light meter for your lighting ratios. But you don't need a light meter to know the dynamic range compression between your highlights and your shadows and whether or not you can actually pull it off. I yesterday took out my GFX 100, and I was out today with the GFX 100, and I encountered this, and I usually take a speed light with me, but I got lazy and I didn't bring my speed light over here. And there's just no way I was going to get this shot because the background was, you know, in super bright sunlight, and the subject that I wanted to shoot was dimly lit. There's no way I could expose for the shadows without blowing the hell out of the highlights. And, you know, I could, you know, expose for the highlights as close as I could and have a decent sensor saturation for your shadows. Yet when I raised the shadows up in post-production, and I knew this would happen, is that the details in the subject were too muddy. There was not enough sensor saturation. Dynamic range compression is so important. This is the reason why people use ND filters. This is the reason why people use, specifically for landscape, use gradated ND filters, you know, where there's neutral density gradation. Then it actually fades to clear. You're obviously trying to kill off the highlights in the sky and still have decent saturation for your subject. In the case of that, with a gradated ND filter, the details would of course be in your subject, i.e. your scenery, you know, the bushes and the trees and everything, unfortunately, and the shadows, which of course is going to get killed off. But nobody ever talks about this in any email that I get, and I get like 100, 150 emails a day, and it's so incredibly important. None of the major YouTube channels talk about lighting ratios, but when you evaluate a scene, I mean, gradated ND filters exist for a reason. So do flashes exist for a reason. They exist obviously for sensor saturation, and they also exist for multiple purposes like stopping motion. But they primarily exist for having dynamic range compression. You know, I could take out a Nikon D4, which has incredible dynamic range, or even my GFX 50S or 50R. You know, some of the best dynamic range cameras that exist currently. Doesn't make any difference. If the lighting ratios are too extreme between the subjects and the highlights, without a flash, you know, or if it's a landscape shot without a gradated ND, it doesn't make any difference. You know, I can squeak it out, you know, raise the shadow, they'll still look muddy. There's so much about dynamic range compression where you're trying to take, you know, radically bright highlights and radically dark subject. Like, wow, this is a great picture, but I can't take this picture. Well, why can't you? Because my highlights are extreme, my subject is dark as hell, and I didn't bring a speed light. I can't bring the lighting ratios between my highlights and my shadows closer together. Let's repeat after me 3 times because this is so important. Dynamic range compression. Dynamic range compression. One more time. Dynamic range compression between your highlights and your shadows. The closer that you can get those there between each other, the lighting ratios, it makes pulling off the shot easy. You're not only doing stop motion, you're actually adding sensor saturation for a better tonality of the shot, but you know you can actually pull the shot off. I forgot my speed light. Well, I didn't forget my speed light yesterday. There was a great shot that I was going to take, and it's not going to happen. I can actually try tomorrow because that same shot is still there, although it's supposed to rain tomorrow. I don't think I'll be able to do it because it's going to rain tomorrow. So I missed my opportunity because I was too lazy to bring out a speed light, which I usually take with me in the camera bag. But I love talking about topics that nobody else is talking about, especially in the photography forums or on YouTube. And you need to know about lighting ratios. You don't have to have a camera with 14 stops of dynamic range. If you have a speed light, then you can bring your lighting ratio so close between your highlights and your subjects, it doesn't matter if your camera's got crappy dynamic range or not. You know how important crappy dynamic range on a camera is for studio and product photography? Not at all. You know why? Because you got control over the lighting. You got control over the shadows. You got control over the highlights. That's all photography. Well, it's not all photography. It's mostly what photography is about, of course, is controlling your lighting. That means having control of your highlights and your shadows. That's really the primary reason for having a speed light. It's not for stop action. It's, like you got a strongly backlit subject on the beach. Like, wow, let's make a great shot, but you're in the shadows and the sun is behind you and I can't pull the shot off unless you got a speed light, and then pulling it off is easy. Then your lighting ratios between your highlights and your shadows goes from this to this. And then your camera can handle it easily. You need to do more research on your own and start looking at lighting ratios. But I wanted to talk about this in a short video because none of these YouTube channels talk about this, but lighting ratios are really important. They are. I mean, I've missed shots. I missed that shot yesterday. You've missed shots. Well, there's too much difference between my highlights and my shadows. So where's your speed light at? But if it's a landscape shot, it's like, man, can't do it. Well, where's your filter adapter and your gradated ND filter? That's what they exist for. They exist for shrinking the dynamic range between your highlights and your shadows so that the shot can be properly exposed and the center can be saturated. Anyway, I will not talk anymore on this subject, at least not in this video anyway. But I'm surprised I never had an email on this topic. It's like nobody talks about it. Why? It's an incredibly important topic. We were taught how important that was in photography school, and I was like, yeah, well, that's completely obvious. I see. Now, my film only has so many stops of latitude between my highlights and my shadows. Yeah, that's what you use your flash for. Or a reflector. Something. Gradated ND filter. Thanks for watching. Bye. Oh, yes, and Fujifilm.